Hi, I'm Caustic Worm, and although you guys can call me Pete, and welcome to the first episode of the Gears of Vengeance campaign prep. In this series, I'll be going over how my Gears of Vengeance campaign came about, kind of how it might change over time, and it will change over time given that players change. You know, when they do stuff, they make things change, and any tips and tricks I have for making a campaign a living, kind of breathing thing. How to interact with it, how to react to what your players have done and bring that up into your next prep, how to add little bits and pieces that foreshadow things that are going to be coming about in the future, or how to make that villain that you sort of introduced and they didn't really like it, tweak them back up and reintroduce them, or take that one character that you introduced that you didn't think they would like at all, that they suddenly fixated on, and turn that into, something that they follow with the rest of the time. I mean, I hope you'll find that this series will be pretty helpful, and please provide any feedback in the comments below. But otherwise, let's get into it. So Gears of Vengeance came out of my need to spend more time with my kids during the pandemic. I mean, let's be honest. I figured a 3 to 4 hour game session every couple of weeks would get us all talking, interacting with each other, get us around the table, although in the end we ended up using VTT, even though we're all in the same house, and provide them with some entertainment, provide me with some entertainment, that sort of stuff. Further, it is also helping me develop my game world that I call Era. So I'm able to get double duty out of this particular thing. For me, all my kids are in high school or higher, so I'm able to run a bit more mature game than most people with their kids are. But in this one, I wanted to run more of a mega dungeon crawl style game, which you can pretty much do for anybody. Just keep the themes, pretty generic or that sort of stuff. Given that, I had to find a spot in the game world that I'm designing, or that I have been developing for this dungeon. As it turns out, in the world that I had started making about 20 years ago, that I had rediscovered right before kind of starting this campaign, it had a mega dungeon that I'd already started planning for called Holvir, which was set up in the Learvar Mountains. So I had a spot for it here, at least to start with. And so I figured it'd be a good place to set this there. And since it was for my kids, it wouldn't matter so much that the world wasn't super detailed yet. We're just doing a mega dungeon, so it didn't really need that much anyway. I mean, mega dungeons mostly just need the dungeon and a place where you can resupply, and that's about it. So what is really a mega dungeon? Mega dungeon is just a dungeon with a ton of levels where most of the game takes place in the dungeon, exploring it, figuring out what's in the dungeon, interacting with the dungeon, coming back out after you have explored some of it, resupplying, going back in, all that sort of stuff. There are several styles of mega dungeon, but that's really beyond the scope of this particular video. If you want to find out more, just a quick Google search of mega dungeon D&D. You'll find something about it. I mean, the biggest, most famous one is the levels below Undermountain. Is Undermountain below Waterdeep. That's probably one of the more famous ones. There's Castle Greyhawk is another big one that was kind of probably the original one. Pathfinder has one that they made. What's his name? Monty Cook's Pinnacle by the City, or City by the Pinnacle, whatever it's called, is basically a mega dungeon. It's just up instead of down. So these are all kind of your mega dungeon type of stuff. So in this case, I want to make a dungeon that made sense from a perspective of what lived there and what had previously lived in there. So that they would interact with it and it would feel like a living, breathing place in the campaign world, not just something thrown together by a mad wizard, or kind of a popcorn kind of thing where we just, hey, this level is all skeletons and this level is all troglodytes and this level is beholders. I didn't kind of want that. I wanted something where the dungeon made sense. Like, somebody lived here, they did something, then they went away, and now these monsters have moved in, and here's the reasons why they moved in, and that sort of stuff. So given that, Holvir suddenly became an abandoned dwarven citadel that I renamed Deltarok. So why did I rename it? Well, Holvir didn't sound very dwarven to me, A, and B, Holvir was really meant to be, originally was meant to be an old diary of the humans in my world, or one of the human sets in my world, ruin from a long time ago. And so as my world has been changing over the course of setting up this campaign and another one, it made more sense for this to be an actual dwarven dungeon instead of an old diary war, citadel, or stronghold. All right, give me one sec. So given that I had this dwarven dungeon, it's time to start figuring out, and that I want to make it feel living in the world. It was time to start designing some of the stuff for it. So, one thing that I want to stress as I start this initial design stuff is that nothing's sacrosanct, in the sense that you may have an idea, you start off with the idea, you can start going down the road with it, you start naming things, and you get well into it, and then you're like, wait, this doesn't make sense. I actually want to change this to that and that to that. And so don't treat anything in your ideas or your design or your campaign as sacrosanct, even from the beginning, from the get-go. I mean, you're going to start playing with your players, and they're going to do stuff that you aren't expecting, or that goes off the beaten path of what you've kind of designed. And so your design's going to have to change anyway. So you might as well just get that started from the beginning. You don't worry about, like the fact that I changed something from, a diary place to a dwarven place. Who cares? Now it's a dwarven stronghold. Let's figure out why the dwarven stronghold is the way it is, and that sort of stuff. So since I decided it was an abandoned dwarven citadel, why did they abandon it? I mean, I kind of vacillated on this for a bit before deciding maybe I should look at some monster I don't normally use, or something else that I don't like, that I haven't used in a while. I've done some campaigns before with a lot of undead. I've done a Pathfinder campaign with Curse of Crimson Throne, which is all very city based. Also still has a lot of undead if you really think about it as you get down to it. Hadn't really done stuff with a lot of Underdark stuff, so that kind of fits in more with this whole, Dwarven Citadel and a Mega Dungeon kind of driving down towards the Underdark. So kind of what's in the Underdark? Well, we could look at Beholders, we have Mind Flayers, we have the Drow. None of those really fit for what I kind of was looking for as a thing that drove out the dwarves, which is kind of where we're going to start with this. Is, well, like, something had to drive these guys out. So what can I do there that will be interesting and unique-ish? I mean, a lot of things are developed based off of tropes and stuff like that, let's be honest. So in this case, I started thinking about it. I was like, well, I haven't done myconids and fungus creatures and, slimes and oozes. I haven't done any of that stuff, like, ever. So this seems like the perfect time to do one, to do that particular thing. So that led me to myconids. So now that we got myconids, why would that creature, drive them out? I mean, fungus are usually pretty easy to get rid of, and myconids are thought to be pretty peaceful and that sort of stuff. So this kind of led me to the creation of a fungal queen called Philobarlop. Now, she and her kingdom were perfectly happy deep in the Underire. So my campaign world, as an aside here, my campaign world is based on floating islands. So I don't really call it the Underdark or the Underworld or anything like that. My floating islands I call Ires, so this is just the Underire, just as a terminology thing for as we move forward. So they're perfectly happy deep in the Underire until the dwarves kind of delved too deep. Remember those tropes I was talking about, and disturbed her and her subjects. And she wasn't super happy with this intrusion, so she and her people basically infiltrated the dwarves via fungus, which then turned the dwarves into zombies. So, that's not a nice thing, but I mean, given the fact that, myconids are normally good, happy people in a lot of campaigns, but they're still people that want to have their own, place in the world and that sort of stuff. And I try to not necessarily place good and evil or law and chaos in the sense of alignments and things on people or on things. So in this case, it's just, hey, they're protecting their kingdom. There was an intrusion. They were confused by it. They were scared of what was coming through. The dwarves were going into their territory with impunity because they didn't realize that those creatures were living here, at least initially. They were, stealing some of the mushrooms to eat. They were, starting to mine some of the ore that was being found down there. And in the end, this just, it's a typical typical kind of territorial dispute more than anything else. It's not like the people were really evil or anything like that on either side. Just, hey, these guys wanted the stuff that was in here. These guys were like, hey, this is our stuff. We're going to fight back. And they fought back the only way they knew how. Developed a fungus that basically eats the brain and turns them into zombies. Seems perfectly reasonable, doesn't it? It is what it is. As an aside here, at this point I had briefly touched on an idea where there was a dwarven chaos mage who was imprisoned by the dwarves, and that maybe he had warped Philo-Barlip's mind in some way. And honestly, we'll come back to chaos mages here later on, because I did sort of continue this idea in a way. But the creatures just being upset by being disturbed was, honestly, as I just explained, was probably good enough. A territorial dispute is a territorial dispute. I mean, it is what it is. All right, so we have a possible villain for the campaign with, Philo-Barlip and her Myconids, or at least a reason why the dwarves fled. I mean, that was the main thing we were trying to get to first. So they're being turned into fungal zombies, and they just couldn't stop the tide, so they basically abandoned Deltarok, and that's the end of this particular dwarven ruin, So why would anybody want to go to this citadel? I mean, why would you want to explore it? So now we got to have a reason to get the adventurers to want to go there in the first place. I mean, other than potentially treasure and stuff like that, but maybe the whole key to that is actually treasure. So this is kind of where I started coming up with a concept of the thing called Aether Tech. Again, remember, floating islands, Aether, kind of works out. But I wanted this world to be a little more kind of steampunky in some ways, and so having an ancient dwarven technology based on powering up weapons and items with like magical pellets or batteries or something like that seemed pretty interesting to me. I mean, in this sense, it's like, hey, I've got a magical item set that as long as I have the battery for it, doesn't matter if I'm a wizard or a mage or anything, I have the ability to use this thing in some fashion. So then you suddenly start getting some interesting concepts of things like ray guns, or, firebolt guns or fireball cannons and all these sorts of things that become sort of, it's not really steampunk at that point, it's more magitech kind of things, but, it's still an interesting kind of concept for the world that these guys, I had been toying with the fact that 2,000, 3,000 years ago, the dwarves were the major power in the world. So why were they the major power? Well, they started having this tech that no one else had. So they were able to easily, take out orcs that were attacking them, or hobgoblins, or even native humans at the same time. So, and what takes them down in the end is a fungus that eats their brains. Imagine that. Or at least this set of dwarves that came up with this tech. So what if the dwarves had made this tech like 2,000 years ago, as I was kind of pointing out, and it was lost when they had to flee the tunnel. So, some of their main practitioners of and inventors of Aether Tech get caught up in the rush to leave and either have to leave their stuff or their brains get eaten. So that kind of leaves around this tech that's just sitting here underground where no one knows where it's at. But some of the dwarves make it out, so legends start to get out about this technology that they had previously created that they have kind of lost the ability to make. And, that starts to get into the hands of wizards or artificers or that myth or legend. And so suddenly they're like, well, maybe we should find this place because maybe it truly exists. There's, enough semi-evidence based on what people keep on saying that maybe it does exist and maybe it's worth us exploring and finding out. So, artificers and stuff would kind of jump at the chance to find such a unique technology. And many of them might even claim that they had made it themselves, or even if they're just the ones to bring it to market. These would definitely be a big impetus towards trying to find this stuff, especially if the world was built in such a way that wizards and sorcerers were being hunted by a religious order. So kind of a tangential thing that sort of makes artificers more important in the world. But it is something that I started doing. This kind of led me to the Church of Seer. The Church of Seer is the main church in this one kingdom that this place is set in. They have an inquisition to kill wizards and sorcerers, and then they regulate the actual artifice technology that's being created. So they kind of like, not all the world is trying to kill wizards and sorcerers. They do exist in the world, but in this particular kingdom, wizards and sorcerers they hide themselves. They try to get out of the kingdom as quickly as possible because this inquisition by the church is intended to kill them and, you know, get rid of them. Similarly with some things like Fae and that sort of stuff, but that's a tangential to this particular campaign. All right. So we got a dungeon, Deltarock. We got a reason for going there, Aethertech. We got a possible villain, depending on what happens with the campaign in the Fungal Queen, Philobarlep. But now we got to figure out how we get the adventurers there. So that begins to start the next set of this design process. Is like, well, we kind of have an idea of why we want to go there, which is artificers. An artificer might have heard of this and heard the legend or something like that. But you know, he's heard it's a legend. Why would anybody want to go there? Well, that's where we kind of entered one Caster Fizzbolt, a gnomish artificer. He's a little bit down on his luck as his main rival Martek Immelvir had been shutting him out of pretty much all the contracts in Tanelvir. Like, he's a good artificer. You know, he's built the reinforcement mortar that was used in the Church of Seer to make it go high above in the heavens with hardly any kind of support, so that you could get an unobstructed view of the suns of the world. So, I mean, he's known as being a good artificer, but you know, he's got a rival, and the rival is almost as good, or is better connected, or is in this case a Seerly. The Seerly run the country, and another set of the humans. They're pretty arrogant. They consider themselves noble, and so they have a little bit of racist tendencies towards the other races, including other humans. And so, you know, the fact that the Baron is also Seerly, Martek is using that kind of relationship to cut out Fizzbolt from things. So while he's drowning his sours, I really can't talk. While he's drowning his sorrows at a local tavern, he happens to overhear a tracker. A country bumpkin tracker from the western part of the barony of Tanelvir talk about some strange runes he's discovered near a cave to the west. Caster's interest gets piqued, and he convinces this tracker to provide him with a map for a small amount of coin. Probably that's usually how it gets convinced. To kind of give him a map to where he found these sort of things. It's a crude map, but at least it's something that could get people there. So now Caster has at least a potential lead on something, and he's kind of a little desperate, not terribly desperate, but a little bit. He's still getting little jobs here and there. I mean, he can still sell his things like Alchemist Fire and all that sort of stuff to people. And he still has a contract with the barony to provide, ever-burning lamps and things in the city. So it's not like he's destitute, but he wants that big score. He wants to become the big guy again. So now that he's got his map, he needs some adventurers to check out this potential lead to the Fabled Ruins. He's not going to go look at it. He's a gnome. He makes stuff. He doesn't go out and adventure. That's for other people to do. So now we kind of have all of our stuff. We have the big bad. If it's not the Fungal Queen, it's the dungeon itself. A reason for going there, the Aethertech, and someone who wants the adventurers to go there, the Caster Fizzbolt. We also have sort of a secondary bad guy now in Martek, because he's probably going to want to stop Caster once he finds out that he's hired somebody to go look for something, or at the very minimum get in on the action in some fashion by convincing the adventurers to come to his side instead, or try to hire somebody to follow them, or something. So that's kind of our basic stuff, our main plot, kind of everything that's going to be moving forward, kind of getting our adventurers in the mix of things, providing our main conflict. I always like, though, to have something else going on that's sort of a side thing that makes the world feel a little more alive, a little more lived in, like, that there's more complexity to it. So there's more layers to the onion, so to speak. And in this case, I decided to come up with a third antagonist that is working both with and against the adventurers. So enter one Opaldoria. Opaldoria is a diary woman who discovered some scrolls detailing strange rituals and rites to one of the diary old gods, Kilrath. Now, Kilrath is the old god of wrathful chaos. She doesn't know that. She just knows that here's this god, these rituals that she finds in her father's trunks and things like that were hidden away in his attic or something like that. Having just lost him in a failed coup attempt, now this would have probably been about 15, 20 years ago in the game world, or thing from the present in the game world, she turned to these rituals to satiate her need for vengeance. Performing them for the first time in over 1,000 years, she catches the attention of Kilrath, and he starts to instruct her via visions on how to take her vengeance on people. And that's kind of where we lose Opal for the next 10 to 15 years until she shows up in Tannelvar, because Kilrath has pointed out through visions that there is an artifact of great chaotic power, chaos power, that can be found in the ruins of Deltarach, a crystal of multiple colors. With this artifact, she should be able to force Kilrath from the prison he has been in for 1,000 years or more, and come about making a new age of chaos in the world. Remember, I told you that chaos mage stuff might come back. So of course, it wouldn't be the typical chaos plan if freeing him was just all lollipops and unicorns. Instead, that's going to destroy shit all over the place for probably miles around wherever the artifact is used. So, kind of giving ourselves another kind of potential big bad here, in the sense that depending on which track the adventurers kind of go down, how they go about doing things, like they could pick to not even ever do anything with Opal, and maybe she figures out her own way of getting the artifact or not. I mean, that's sort of down the road. But it sort of gives us another alternate big bad if, for some reason, over the course of the campaign, they never ever make it to the Underdark or the Underire, where the kingdom of the fungal creatures are. They will. They should, in some sense. Like, they're going to get into Deltarach, and they'll see. We'll go into that a little later, but they'll see that there's still many of the fungal zombies around. So that'll alert them anyway. But at the same time, having the secondary thing is just sort of a backup plan. All right, so now we have a second antagonist, which can, like I said, be the big bag if we want. And she's also going to want the adventurers to help her because she needs something out of Deltarach. If she can convince them to go get it for her, then why wouldn't she use that? And, we've sort of got extra layers to the campaign now. All right, so at this point, I'm feeling pretty good about where the design's going, what we're going to do, all that sort of stuff. So let's kind of put it all together. After I take a small drink of water. All right. If you've seen any of the previous ones, which there's only been one campaign prep one so far besides this one, you guys know that I use Sly Flourish's method for campaign prep and game prep and development and stuff like that. So at that point, once we have our initial thought of what might be going on, we sort of write our sentences. So our sentences are sort of the real quick, here's what's going on in the world. So if we had to improv something, we could just quickly look at the sentences and go, oh, here's the main things that is going to happening. This is what they're doing right now. How am I going to fit that into this? Okay, that really follows from this. Now I'm going to do this. And so we move on if we have to actually do something. So let's talk about our main sentences. And at the same time, let's kind of go over it in two different things. Now, when I first started doing this campaign, it was actually about a year ago. In fact, almost exactly a year ago. The first session was Halloween of last year. And I was not using World Anvil. So I have World Anvil up here on the screen. It's been up there for the first, third of this, will probably be a third of this video, showing sort of the Gears of Vengeance. Now, eventually I switched to this, but initially I used something called Notion. And initially I also called this campaign Shades of Vengeance. So it wasn't Gears of Vengeance, it was Shades of Vengeance. And I had found a picture, and this was going to be my Opal Daria right here. And so my initial sentences, which let me zoom in a little bit here so that it becomes a little bit easier to see on screen. So, and you also see over on the side some of my other campaigns, because I was using Notion.so for quite a bit. My initial sentences here are, Caster Fizzbolt wants the knowledge of crafting possessed by the ancient dwarves of Deltarok before his rivals obtain it. But he's having difficulty obtaining it with his clockwork servants because the denizens of Deltarok keep destroying them. So that's the first one. Kielvik, Opal changed her name when she became the leader of a cult, wants to bring back the god of wrath, Kielreth, during the Dark Night. But she requires the Warhammer of Chaos, which resides in Deltarok. And her followers have failed to obtain it because of the fungal-driven dwarves therein. There's sort of our secondary guy right there. And the last one is Philo Barlip wants to keep everyone away from her fungal kingdom deep below Deltarok, and has found a way to destroy them all. But her army of Myconids cannot breach the surface world until the sky has been turned to black during the Dark Night. So you can see there's a couple things here that I didn't talk about that are kind of in these initial sentences, which are this thing called the Dark Night. I think back then I was originally thinking that there would be sort of a total eclipse that occurs, which causes the world to go dark. I still am going to use that in this campaign. It's just not in the sentences that we'll talk about here in a second, which are the sort of the second version of this after a couple sessions. You'll notice that it sounds like they're already being able to get into the actual Deltarok. Like Deltarok has been found. I mean, it's very clear if his clockwork servants are being destroyed by Deltarok, and her cultists are having troubles getting into there because of the dwarves that are inside, the fungal dwarves inside. So clearly on this first set of my stuff, Deltarok had already been found. It was a matter of people just going into it. I sort of started that way because I was just like, oh, I just want to get them into the adventure and get them into the actual mega dungeon as quickly as possible. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, my kids might actually be more interested in finding it as a sort of the initial, kind of first few levels of character development. And the reason being is like, then, I can put down in the history of the world that these set of adventurers found Deltarok and, started bringing out the treasures from therein, kind of giving them sort of that extra notoriety, it's not the right word, that sort of extra satisfaction of having done something before they even start going down deep into the thing, building that confidence up. And just, in general, it'd be kind of an interesting thing for them to have done this and have figured this out. Sort of rises their reputation in the game world as well from a character standpoint. Here's these people who have found this fabled place that has had legends about it. They keep it to themselves, obviously, initially, because they don't want everybody to go steal the stuff, or at least I hope they do. They haven't quite gotten there yet in the campaign, but they're close. I know it's been a year, but I'm playing every other weekend, so it's not as many sessions as you might think. And then, that kind of rolled back the fact that Deltarok was already found. Now I'm back to it's just legends and things like that. They need to find it first. So that was kind of the initial thing. I'm doing this with Notion.so, and if you see here, like through Sly's stuff, you figure out a theme. In this case, the theme is vengeance leads to destruction and downfall. That theme is going to stay through. That theme has stayed throughout this whole thing. That kind of directs where I'm going to go and what fits and what doesn't. This is actually also from another guy as well, whose name escapes me. I was watching a few different videos at the time I did this from Sly Flourish and the GM something or other. He's got a GM book Kickstarter out right now. I'll find it and put it in the description at some point in here. So I then I kind of do a background and a campaign summary, and then I kind of outline the various adventures that I'm probably going to be potentially doing, like sort of level breakdowns. And hey, once we get to this level, I want to kind of do this sort of thing, and once I get to this level, I kind of want to do this sort of thing. And we'll go through that in a little bit because we'll talk about that in that sense. But so this was Notion.so. Notion.so is basically free. You don't have to pay anything for it. It's basically a series of pages. So here was an adventure ideas page I had that was just pulled off from some things. Some notes from my session 0. This is a thing also from Sly Flourish. When you do your session 0, kind of go over the 6 truths of the campaign, all that sort of stuff as you go through it. So that's kind of this sort of thing. A characters page where here's the characters that got made, an NPCs page where it's sort of a database of the various NPCs. So here's the Baron, Lord Douglas Fultine, Valnir Iltaril is his spy master. So a couple little things there that I come up with. Locations, so here's Delta Rock, some description of that, Tanlavar, the city, along with, you know, some maps and stuff like that, some images to kind of give it some sort of stuff. Same thing with Delta Rock, very, very minimal, but some basic ideas of what the top level might be from Dyson's logo and stuff like that. So some initial stuff. Villain stuff, so here's kind of like, Umdal was remember I talked about the Chaos Mage initially. Umdal was that initial Chaos Mage being stuck in the Dwarven prison. So I mean, here he is with all of his, a bit of some stuff like that. That was when I was thinking that that Philo Barlop should be kind of corrupted by something to really make her want to do this plan, and then I decided not to do that. Cult of Kilreth is Opal's thing. So you see, you know, just different things from the villains. The Circle of being a thieves guild and things like that. I was trying to design some of that sort of stuff out. So, and you can see I also had run 4 sessions here in Notion before moving on to World Anvil. So let's take a look real quick at World Anvil. World Anvil is the same, in essence, the same thing here in World Anvil is this here, which is, here's my sentences, but they've changed slightly in this sense. Now we're at Caster Fizzbolt has heard tales of wondrous technology used by the High Clan holds, and wants the knowledge of this crafting to increase his standing in the barony of 14. Now, it's actually now the barony of Tanovar, so yet again, it keeps changing. Keeps changing in the sense that I haven't updated this document yet in a while. However, he's run into a problem. No one knows where this technology can be found. Opaldoria wants to bring back the God of Wrath, Kilrath, during the Dark Night, so I still kept the Dark Night kind of here. But she requires a powerful item of chaos to power the ritual. Kilrath has provided her with a dream that has shown a multicolored crystal residing in the middle of a dwarven ruin. She can feel the power of the crystal is close, but unfortunately doesn't know it resides in the dwarven ruins of Delta Rock. She has sent out her followers to try to find the crystal to no avail. And as we said, for the last one, Philo Barlop and her fungal kingdom live an idyllic existence in the Underire. If only the surface dwellers would stop bothering them. As the people explore the ruins above, she becomes more and more desperate to stop the unwanted intrusion. To this end, she seeks out a ritual that will allow her and her people to be free of the surface world once and for all. So this is kind of when the second 2 are kind of, here's where potentially big bads could interchange depending on what goes on with the campaign. So that's kind of where I'm starting from. It's kind of a loose set of ideas from these 3 sentences, where the campaign might go, how I might provide some conflict during it. There's always going to be some little side quests that you always do along the way as you filling out time, or the characters latch onto something and decide they want to go in a particular direction. So you slowly, you know, direct them back to the way they're where you want them to go. Sometimes they don't go where you want them to go anyway, and so you know, this stuff will change, and maybe Philo Barlop will go away and something else will go in. In fact, in a future one of these, you'll find out that is exactly what has happened, actually. Opal's still here, Philo is gone. So this is even changed even from this. Initially, we need to find the Mega Dungeon. So Castor will be the main point here of where the adventurers kind of delve into this thing. Then we kind of want Opal to come to the fore a bit as she desperately tries to get this artifact that she needs to bring back her god. This sort of gives us an initial campaign endpoint. Once she gets the artifact and tries to bring back her god, we can actually stop the campaign at that point if we want. If they fail, well, clearly they probably died, so different place. If they haven't and they stop her, well, it's a good kind of ending point to the campaign. Probably would only be level 12 to 14, somewhere in there, based on kind of what I'm talking about. But it could be up to level 20 based on some of the other things that were going on. But it's a good place to stop if we want to. And you know, at that point we can decide, hey, do we want to continue? If they do, then time will pass and then something else will kick in. Philo Barlap, for instance, potentially, or this other thing that I'm sort of alluding to. If, like I said, if we don't stop, then they can continue to explore Del Turok, and we bring back some of the other stuff that was going on. So let's look a little bit at World Anvil now while we're at it. So again, you see all the 3 sentences that I did. They're similar thing. Same theme: vengeance and greed lead to destruction and downfall. Again, sort of the lens you look through when you're sort of making the adventures, deciding on what fits in the campaign, what doesn't, all that sort of stuff. You kind of, that one line should be everything you need to go for. Oh yeah, okay, this fits with vengeance or greed or that sort of stuff. So, you know, the fact that Castor wants to find this stuff, he's a little bit greedy. He's not super greedy. He's not a bad man. He's just desperate. But greed later on will lead him to want to get more and more, and that might lead to something. Martek, definitely a greedy guy. He wants to get the stuff for himself so he can become rich, even richer than he actually is. You know, things of that nature. There's people we haven't even talked about here that kind of will come up over the course of this thing, like the Baron of Tanelvir. He's going to be greedy. He's going to want the stuff for himself. You know, potentially the Viscount, the Viscountess, actually, because it's a regent, in the capital city of Eiley. Capital of the Nairo Marches, which is where this barony is set in. Maybe she wants it at some point. Maybe she never learns about it. I mean, maybe the characters never go there, but you still have some ideas of where that might lead to. So that's kind of where that theme needs to be a part of. So I usually write a quick background about things like, hey, it's sort of like a blurb about each of the various parts, sort of from a historical perspective. So in this case, like, I write a little bit about the Citadel of Del Turok itself, where it's at, how far away it actually is. This one still sort of has that somebody had originally discovered it, called Martin Pitlier. He had sort of found it, made a claim on it, but then was never heard of again after his second expedition in the Citadel. So he kind of took its location to his grave. Most people don't even believe he found it because, you know, he never came back. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. No one knows where it actually is, based on him. But I do sort of the thing, like sometimes adventurers go into the mountains themselves trying to find it, because they know that it's potentially there. Sometimes people find other things, though. Until someone can prove that they found the ruins again, no one in Tanelvar will believe them, but many in the city want the ruins to be found because they believe it will, you know, rise everybody's boat, all tides will rise, cause all, you know, the freaking thing I'm trying to say. So adventurers usually get benefactors and things like that to outfit them to go try to search for them. Most people have not found it. So part of the reason is there was a rock slide that kind of closed the main entrance. And so recently, and this is kind of where the campaign starts to come into focus, at least for the beginning, erosion and minor earthquakes have revealed some of the old outposts of Del Turok. So the Mahel garrison was the first to be revealed as flash floods from the spring rains washed away a portion of the cliffside, revealing a cave system. This is what the one tracker had found. Several weeks later, a small earthquake in the region caused the rocks covering the Kahar garrison to shift, revealing the edges of the defenses built there. Finally, that same earthquake caused a portion of the ceiling in the highest reaches of the Wifrir archives to collapse, revealing the sky above. So there's several places where they can actually find information about Del Turok and the clan holds. So kind of that gives me a little bit of a background to start with, to go through things. Normally, I would probably have written more about, like, hey, Philo Barlap has done this, and Opal's been doing this, but I kind of did that with some of the sentences, and I did that also in Notion. Like, if we go back to Notion and we bring up villains, and we bring up the cult of Kilreth, you can see I've kind of done background on her. I just haven't pulled it into World Anvil yet, but I will be soon enough. So that gives me the background there. I'm not going to really go through it because it doesn't make sense for now. But that gives us sort of a background. Then I kind of do a bit of a campaign summary. We've already kind of went over the campaign summary a bit when we kind of described some of the stuff. In this case, It's mostly the three main villains. Martek is sort of the first one. As we move forward, Opal kind of becomes the middle thing, and Philo becomes the last arc, third of it. Martek, trying to prevent them from finding or helping out Castor, or trying to bribe them to help him instead, sort of gives some moral quandaries kind of stuff there. Opal, because she's got some ulterior motives, that initially she looks like she's trying to just help them, or she's just got stuff that she needs to find in there and they're help out with her. And Philo, because they don't even know initially, and she wants them gone. They've just been doing stuff that's disturbing her, because she remembers it from a long time ago. All right. Then I kind of delve into various arcs or adventures. So these are just a loose outline of things, of kind of where I expect the campaign to kind of go, what I might do, where I expect them to be, what levels I expect them to be when they get to certain places and things like that, so that we can kind of have an idea of how to level them up and that sort of stuff. In this case, let's start over with the things where these initial arcs. This is sort of the initial one. Things do change over time. I mean, they actually can change a lot. They didn't get out of the outposts until they were already third level. The second one, the Deltarok, the Upper Halls, they're not even at yet. They did a bunch of side quests, and they're just about to start this arc at this point. So, but let's kind of go over where I initially thought this was going to go. So first, we start by figuring out how to get to Deltarok via some ruined dwarven outposts, so the outposts. At the same time, Martek is kind of sending people out to stop them. So those are sort of the initial kind of, here's how we jump this into the fray. After that, they actually find Deltarok and explore the upper halls, where they find some workshops and examples of Aether Tech, as well as a book of knowledge regarding it. The book of knowledge is important. From there, they delve a bit deeper and find the city teeming with fungal zombie dwarves. During this time is when Opal approaches them to ask for their help about finding a multicolored crystal in the ruins. She doesn't know where it is. She doesn't even know how to find it, but she kind of asks them about it, and it's sort of a precursor. Remember how I said, sort of drop some breadcrumbs in for future sort of things. This would be sort of that thing there. Having finally deciphered the book, Castor sends them back in to find a library where they'll find more information on Aether Tech, and a bunch of books and other things. If you look in sort of my extra stuff, so I'm giving you sort of a summary of things, but as I talk about the sort of the middle hall and things like that, I kind of give things more like, here's a bit more. So Castor and the adventurers are able to decipher enough of the map to be able to definitively say where the ruins are. They send the adventurers to explore the upper levels to see if they can find any more of the Aether Tech, especially blueprints or tomes. Exploring these upper levels leads them to find the entranceway and many upper halls that are collapsed, and it looks to have been on purpose. Eventually they discover a hidden doorway, which leads them to a series of workshops that provide more examples and more tomes of knowledge. And so I kind of also give monsters and stuff in this thing. For the initial upper halls, it's going to be more traps and things like that. A few things like oozes and stuff, but it's going to be monster light. I want the upper halls to be pretty empty, to make it feel like there's not a lot going on here, so that when they start to delve down deeper and they start finding the zombies, they start finding ghosts in various places from some of the dwarves that died, and more and more powerful fungal creatures and things like that. So it lulls them into a false sense of security, basically. So that's kind of what's going on with that upper one. With the information from the library, though, they determined the crystal to be located on the Warhammer of Grun Deltarok, a hero of the dwarves, and one of the sons of the founder. He was buried with it, and so they head back in to find his tomb in the Warhammer. Along the way to the tomb, they run across a group of Myconid scouts, as the tomb is quite deep in Deltarok. So this sort of a meaty adventure there that kind of gives them a bit more leveling. So as you see in this, it's sort of the 8th to 10th level kind of spot. After a period of time where they don't do anything and give them downtime and that sort of stuff, Castor finally approaches them again as the description of the Warhammer and the crystal have made him realize it is a chaos stone, a ley stone, and in the wrong hands that could be a disaster. Racing to find Opal, the adventurers eventually discover her attempting to complete a ritual to open the crystal and the prison of Kilrath. And like I said, at this point, notice in this one I called it God of Chaos. At this point, we could stop. Like, the campaign could be over at this point if we really wanted to. If I decided, hey, you know what, it's a good place to stop. It had a nice, good ending point. Everybody felt like their character arcs had reached a conclusion. This is probably where we'd stop. But just in case, sort of had the background kind of stuff. At some point, the Baron Seneschal summons the adventurers as he's learned there are some strange deaths occurring around Tanovar. People are growing some kind of fungus on their back, which eventually consumes the brain and animates them. Sound familiar? Hearing the description, the adventurers realize this is what they saw in Deltarach. So it is back into the ruins to find the source and stop it once and for all. Now, that turns into like three adventures over here in this thing. I kind of summarized it there just because at this point in time, it doesn't need to be that. It doesn't need to be as in-depth as I did over here. This is like, 16, 15, 14 or so levels away. So there's no real reason to start worrying about this being too in-depth about it. All right. At this point, I would do a session 0. As you saw in Notion here, I did do a session 0. That was this one right here. Did the truths and stuff, went over the character options, talked to my kids about what they wanted to play, even recorded it, at least audio-wise, and then got the idea of what the characters they want to make. They sort of make their characters talk to each other, do all that stuff they need to. I try to give expectations out in that session 0. Like, here's the campaign that we're going to kind of do. It's a dungeon crawl campaign, so your druid probably not, your nature druid probably not as cool as maybe, Circle of Creeping Doom or something like that. Your seafaring paladin probably not going to be very good in this particular, not going to be as useful in this campaign. That being said, I'll try to make any character work, but I try to steer people away from that sort of stuff. Just because, like I said, your Corsair probably not going to be as useful in a dungeon crawl. So you really shouldn't be trying to play that particular type of character in a dungeon crawl. My kids didn't go down that road. One of them played a rogue that was more focused on trap finding and stuff like that, which makes sense. One played an artificer, made a ton of sense for this particular game. And one plays a fighter, like a battle master or something like that, so that to provide them some power. As is always the case, the plan doesn't survive contact with the players. So the first session almost ended in a TPK because they thought they were more powerful than they actually were. This campaign kind of started while we were finishing up a Curse of the Crimson Throne campaign. They were used to like 16th, 17th level characters, and they're starting to play first level characters again. That being said, it did teach me this in the beginning of the Red Skies game, which I talked about in the previous session or previous video. Taught me that, first level is probably not a good place to start players at for a long-term campaign. If you're going to play a simple, one-shot game, sure, but really second level, maybe even third level is probably the right place to start players, just because they can already have some abilities. They feel, they got some, they're not too squishy. They can finally make a sort of a decision about what they want to do and that sort of stuff. So I think moving forward after these campaigns are done, I'll probably be starting at second or third level moving forward. And I do recommend that. I mean, especially for a campaign that's going to last for a while. I mean, they're putting time in to make the backgrounds on these characters. You don't want them to be too squishy and just have them immediately be dead, and now we start making new characters again. That just doesn't make any sense. It also turns out that it's harder to balance for 3 players than I thought. My goblins were a little too powerful for the players, so that kind of has changed a little bit, and future episodes of this campaign prep will kind of explore those changes and how they've affected the overall plan. Spoiler alert, we added a couple more players, and some of the background and some of what those players have done have actually changed who might be the ending big bad. That's why I said Farlow Barlop has probably gone away. So you got to be flexible with this stuff and react to the players so that they have agency with what's going on. Like, sure, we're still going to Delta Rock. They're still going to do the stuff with Delta Rock because they're hired by Caster at this point to do that stuff. But now there's some other extraneous things that have gone on because of what these new characters have brought that are changing what the end game might be for the campaign itself. As I pointed out, I used Notion through most of the initial design portion of it and showed you all through that sort of stuff. I do recommend it if you are on a budget and don't want to pay for anything but want to have a place to have your notes and stuff like that. It works perfectly fine. It's a relatively decent database. You can I can click on here and go to another page, and it shows me the page of that. Kind of, it's hyperlinked, all that sort of stuff. So it's decent for that. And so it works. It works perfectly fine. There's some things that it doesn't have that I kind of wanted, things like some mapping tools, player forums and that sort of stuff. So that is why I kind of switched to World Anvil. World Anvil has the ability to bring players in and characters and that sort of stuff. I can still do the session reports in Notion, but the player stuff is kind of the bigger one. It allows me to provide information to players a bit more, but keep secrets inside of that information that they can't see. Like I said, can do the mapping stuff. So, here's the map of the world. In fact, here's actually the map of the area that they're currently in, the Nyrel Marches. Tanalvar is, as you can see from the political map, right here. This gives me a bit more stuff that they can look at. It's also a website they can go to and actually read information about it and stuff like that. So it's that kind of thing. That's the reason why I went to World Anvil. But to get to a lot of this stuff and to have all the players that I have, because I'm running 3 campaigns through this and that sort of stuff, cost me money. So I spent money on this to make it work, to make it as convenient as possible for me. Like I said, it's a budget thing. They both work equally as well. This had a few more features that I wanted. That's all. As you can, it also works better for me because it's a little more freeform in the way of writing I do with this. It's actually intended for writers and stuff like that, so it helps out in that sort of stuff. I can also add markers and stuff on here, and I will, because Delta Rock is technically right here. Right in this mountain right here. I can do that. Anyway, I shouldn't do that in case they watch this video, because I forgot to put a spoiler warning on it. So there's that. I still have some of my notes in Notion yet that I haven't pulled in. I'll eventually pull them in. I just had forgotten that. Quite frankly, I'd forgotten that I left them over there. First time I've looked at Notion in probably 2 months tonight for this particular video. That is kind of the gist of everything, and that's kind of it for this campaign prep episode. I do hope you find it interesting to see how I go about making these campaigns, and that you can hopefully find something to use here for your campaign or your campaign prep. Like I said, I'll put links to Sly Flourish, and I think it's called like the GM. Oh, I can't remember his name now. But I'll put it also into those 2 links into the description of this video, as well as links to Notion and World Anvil, so that you can kind of look at those if you wish. Next time we'll start to discuss the first arc of the campaign, even though it's already over. I'll go over how it was designed, how it was played out. Like I said, almost a TPK the first session, and what then changed in the overall plans of the campaign based on how that whole thing ended up going. Not a lot changed from it. More changed from the next arc, which we'll then do in a successive one after that. But I hope you found this interesting. If you did, give me a like. If you didn't, then give me a not like. That's still something that I learned from this. Until next time, though, happy gaming.